Hey everybody, Flavor Monkey here, and today I'm going to walk you through a really simple recipe and method for a 10% whole grain sourdough loaf. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to combine all the flour and the water in the recipe. It doesn't really matter how you mix this. The only thing that's important is to make sure that all of the flour is completely hydrated. We don't want any dry bits or lumps in the dough. Okay, once that flour is hydrated, we're going to do an AUTOLYSE for about an hour. As you can see, the dough right now is very crumbly and tears easily. But what that AUTOLYSE is going to do is activate the gluten and begin to develop some extensibility or stretch in the dough. Okay, that AUTOLYSE is complete now, and after just an hour, look at the difference in the dough, how much more extensible that is. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and add the leaven to it. Young leaven is basically a starter that has not reached its peak and rise yet. That for me is about 4 hours, and that's going to give this dough a bit of a boost going into bulk fermentation. So I'm just going to add all of that leaven across the top of the dough, and then I'm gonna start working it in with my fingers. First just kind of cutting it into the dough, and then folding the edges in towards the center and really just kind of gently working the dough. You don't want to begin to develop it at this point. You just want to incorporate all of that leaven into it. So I'm going to do that for about 2 to 3 minutes. That's starting to look nicely incorporated, so we're just going to let it rest for 30 minutes before we add the salt to it. Okay, for the salt, you want to use just any kind of sea salt. I've used a kosher salt here that I've just ground fine in a mortar and pestle, and I'm just going to sprinkle it lightly onto the surface. And then do the same thing that I did with the leaven. Start by cutting it in with my fingers and then folding it from the edges into the center. Kind of like when you're doing a stretch and fold, except there's not really any stretch here. You're just sort of folding it to incorporate it fully into the dough. And then once I've folded it into the center, I'm just going to work it for another 2 to 3 minutes, really gently, just to get that salt fully absorbed and incorporated evenly throughout the dough. once that salt's been incorporated, I'm just going to do a quick probe to check dough temperature. For this recipe, you want to shoot for between 78 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we're going to rest for another 30 minutes before we begin bulk fermentation. Okay, so after 30 minutes rest, we're going to head into bulk fermentation, which at this temperature should be about 4 hours. We're going to do 6 sets of stretch and folds, with the first 3 at 20-minute intervals and the final 3 at 30-minute intervals. And then we're going to leave the dough untouched for the final 90 minutes. As you can see, I'm just grabbing from underneath the dough, stretching it out, and then folding it over. And I'm doing it at about 90-degree intervals, going around until it's kind of formed into a rough ball again. You can see at this point that there's still not much dough development going. It's still very granular, spongy. It almost has a bit of a sort of coral-like sponge characteristic to it. Now here I've skipped ahead to the third stretch and fold, and you can see that it's starting to develop more elasticity, more strength, still quite spongy. You can see those striations that my fingers leave in it. That dough's still not fully developed yet. So after this third set of stretch and fold, I'm just going to do another quick temperature probe on it, make sure that the dough's still at the temperature that I want during the fermentation. If there's, 1 or 2 degrees up or down, that's probably okay, but if it's considerably warmer, then you're going to have a shorter bulk time, or if it's considerably cooler, then you're going to have a longer bulk fermentation time. So temperature of the dough is really important to figuring out your timings, as well as the development itself, what the dough tells you. Okay, now we're going into the final set of stretch and fold. Again, I've skipped ahead a little bit, but you can see how much more developed this dough is at this point. It's glossy, it's smooth, those striations are gone now. It's beginning to feel pillowy and soft, and this is a really strong, extensible dough at this point. Once I've finished that last set of stretch and fold, I'm just going to round it off a little bit, and then again we're going to leave it 90 minutes untouched for the end of bulk fermentation. Okay, time to pre-shape. So I'm just going to release the dough from the bowl by doing a couple of stretch and folds just to help coax it out onto the surface. And then using my bench knife and my hand that I've got some water on to keep the dough from sticking, I'm just going to spin the dough into a little bit of a loose round, building some surface tension, and then 30 minutes bench rest. Okay, time for final shaping here. I'm just putting a little bit of dusting flour on top of the round, and then a little bit onto the bench to make it easier to work with, before using my bench knife to gently slide under the dough and then flip it so that the top side is down in one motion. Now, what's now the top of the dough is quite sticky, and I don't want flour on that because I'm going to need it to seal the shape. Now, I probably should have flipped it a little bit further over on the board, but I'm just going to use a little bit of flour to slide under the dough with the bench knife, just to make sure that it doesn't stick while I'm shaping. So I'm going to be shaping a batard in this video, which is an oval shaped bread. And in order to do that, I'm going to stretch the dough out into a sort of loose rectangular shape. Now, you don't have to work particularly fast at this point. You can be quite gentle and just slowly work the dough out until you're happy with a rectangular shape to begin the folds. So the first fold I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the right side in 1/3, and then I'm going to fold the left side over that 1/3 into a letter-like shape. And I'm just pressing down now to seal it and just popping any bubbles that formed. And then at the bottom, just pulling the edges out so that to make it easier to seal. And then at the top, away from you and then in and roll, sealing it down with your fingers with each successive roll until you get back to the seam, and now you've got a shaped petard. Okay, going into the banneton here, just dusting with a blend of rice flour and AP to keep it from sticking. And then it's going to go into the banneton seam side up. And so I'm just going to use my bench knife to do that. And then we're going to proof for about 20 minutes at room temperature in the banneton. And then I'm going to put it in the fridge overnight for at least a 12-hour retard to help develop some more flavor in that loaf before baking tomorrow. Okay, so for this bake I'm using a Dutch oven, which I'm going to preheat for at least an hour to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'm going to turn the loaf out into the preheated Dutch oven base. And then I'm going to score it by using my lame to cut at about a 45-degree angle, about a 1/2 inch deep down the length of the loaf. And then I'm going to mist with a little bit of water just across the top of the loaf, and that should help boost steam production going into the bake. Okay, coming out of the oven, and look at that loaf. Great oven spring, nice ear, really nice color on it. I know it's tempting to cut into it right away, but you want to wait at least 2 hours for the crumb to fully develop while that loaf tempers. Now this is 2 hours later, so I'm going to go ahead and slice into it so that I can give you guys the crumb shot. This is what we're looking for. A nice even open crumb, really creamy, custardy. I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to a sandwich. Hope you liked this video, everyone. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you'd like more recipes like this one. Thanks, you guys. Flavor Monkey out.